What if I told you guys that political power isn't just determined by who votes, but also how our maps are drawn? You see, most of us think elections are decided at the ballot box, but before a single vote is even cast, lines are drawn that determines which votes, which communities vote together, who has influence, and ultimately whose voices carry the most weight, right? So recently, the United States Supreme Court cleared the way for Alabama to use a congressional map for the 2026 elections that reduces the number of districts where Black voters make up a majority of the near majority from the two districts to one. So the decision halted a lower court ruling that had blocked the map and found Alabama was likely to prevail in the legal challenge moving forward. You see, supporters of the ruling say that states should have greater authority over drawing their own districts and that race should actually play a more limited role in redistricting effects. There are many critics who argue the decision weakens Black political representation and diminishes the ability of Black communities to elect candidates of their own choice. So, today, we're not simply asking whether the court made the right decision here. We're simply asking a much deeper question. Is having the right to vote the same thing as having political power? Welcome to Provoking Perspectives, guys. I am Miss Bree, the voice behind Provoking Perspectives. This is a platform where we challenge assumptions, explore different viewpoints, and engage in conversations that encourages us to think beyond many of different headlines that come out today. So, for today's episode, I actually reviewed reporting and analysis from Reuters, NPR, and other sources covering voting rights, redistricting, and the most recent Alabama congressional map case. As always, this conversation is not about telling you what to think. It's actually about giving you information and context and perspectives needed to think for yourself. So let's get into it. I want to start with the basics, okay? Let's just break it down. You see, many of people hear words like redistricting and gerrymandering, but they aren't completely sure about what exactly does it mean. I know I was one of them. So redistricting, you see, actually happens every 10 years after the census. States redraw congressional district boundaries to account for all of these population changes that go on. On the surface, you see, that seems pretty normal, right? In fact, it's actually even required today. The controversy begins when people believe those lines are being drawn in ways that intentionally create political advantages. That's where the term gerrymandering comes in. Gerrymandering refers to drawing district lines in a way that benefits a particular political interest or even group. Sometimes communities are packed together into a single district. Sometimes communities are split apart across multiple districts. Either way, the outcome can affect who gets elected and who voice carries the most influence. Did you guys know that Black residents make up roughly 1/4 of Alabama's population? And for the 2024 election cycle, Alabama actually used a court ordered map that included two districts where Black voters had a meaningful opportunity to elect candidates of their own choice, right? The map approved for 2026 returns Alabama to a majority or near majority Black districts out of 7 congressional districts. The fact that it sits at the center of today's debate, that's what we're discussing here, because the question isn't simply who can vote, right? The question is whether communities have enough voting strength to influence election outcomes. Can changing a map change a community's influence? That's what we're really talking about here. Now, if you guys are wondering why this issue creates such strong reactions inside of Black communities today, we have to understand our own history first as black people. Because for many people, this conversation is not just about maps here. It's actually a much longer struggle of representation and political influence. You see, when conversations like this one happen specifically, many people immediately focus on all of the legal arguments at hand. But for Black Americans, voting rights have never been the legal issue here. It's been very personal for many of us. It's been very generational for our families. They've been, a lot of these things have been hard fought. For much of the American history, Black citizens faced barriers that made voting difficult or even nearly impossible. For example, there were actually poll taxes, literacy tests, intimidation, violence, and laws that are specifically designed to limit political participation. The civil rights movement challenged those barriers. You see, as the civil rights challenged those barriers, there were thousands upon hundreds of thousands people who marched, organized. They risked their jobs. They risked their own safety. And that is like such a big deal because, I mean, when we think about it, it's like, wow, we did so much. And in some cases, they even also sacrificed their own lives, right? So, the most significant outcomes of the movement of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was the law that designed to eliminate discriminatory voting practices and protect minority voters from systems that were diluted. But here's something worth thinking about. I'm going to give you guys a little tea. What exactly were people fighting for here? What exactly were they fighting for? Was the goal simply just to access a ballot box? Or was the goal meaningful representation and political influence? Because those aren't necessarily the same thing. I know a lot of people today like to think that it is, but it's not. So I want you guys to understand something. Did you know that the Voting Rights Act wasn't only about allowing people to vote? No, 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 no. It wasn't just about that. It was also address practices that could weaken the voting strength of minority communities, even when voting itself was technically allowed. That distinction remains at the center of many voting right debates today. And that's why cases like this one in Alabama generate so much attention. For many of people, these legal battles are viewed directly through the lens of our history as Black people. They aren't just asking what does the law say? They are asking what the law means for communities that have spent generations fighting to be heard. And that brings us to the biggest question of today's episode. A question that goes beyond Alabama, beyond the courtrooms, beyond all of the political parties. Does voting automatically equal political power? At first glance, the answer may seem oh so obvious. I mean, there are many, 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 many answers that we could come up with, right? Of course, it seems so obvious. That's what democracy is supposed to be about, truly, I believe. But let's actually think about it here. You see, political scientists often distinguish between participation and influence. Participation actually means you have the ability to vote. Like you and I, we have the ability to go out every day. Well, when it's time and vote, right? Influence means your vote helps shape the outcome of things. Those aren't always the same thing that a lot of people miss. They aren't always actually the same thing because a community can participate in every election. A community can actually show up at the voting polls. A community can exercise its rights. But if that community feels its concerns are consistently overlooked, does it feel powerful anymore? And that's where the conversation becomes so much more complex because representation isn't just about elections here. It's about the impact. It's about whether elected officials advocate for community priorities. It's about whether resources, policies, and opportunities reflects the needs of the people that they represent. So, here's a question I want you guys to sit with because it's been on my heart, it's been on my mind all week. So, I want you guys to sit with this and see if you can come up with something. Is representation measured by who gets elected, or is it measured by what changes what changes after they are elected? Because those, you see, are two very different type of standards. One thing I noticed while researching this story is that people often use three different terms as if they mean the same thing: voting rights, representation, and political power. But they are all actually different. For those who are actually paying attention, we know that they're different. Voting rights actually means that you have access to participate. Representation means that your community has elected officials who represent its interests. And then political power actually means that your community has influence over the decisions and the outcomes. And in the Alabama case, it actually forces us to think about whether those three things all move together simultaneously. And if they don't, what does the real power actually look like here? And also, you see, there's another question that led me to another realization. Maybe the most important conversations isn't about the ballot box at all. Maybe it's about power itself. When I started researching this topic, I actually realized something very important here. Throughout Black American history, many of the greatest gains were not actually achieved through elections alone in America. They were actually achieved through institutions, businesses, churches, schools, community organizations, mutual aid networks, media platforms, economic ecosystems. And in other words, voting was just only one tool, but it was never the only tool, guys. Now, let's actually look at both sides of this debate. You see, oh Lord, this is a big one. If we look at both sides, you see, critics of the Alabama ruling argue that reducing districts where Black voters can effectively elect candidates of their choice may actually weaken political influence. They worry that community priorities could receive less attention. They also worry about reduced representation and, excuse me, they worry about long-term political disengagement. All these worries. God damn. These are a lot of worries. So, right, it's a lot of words. But supporters of the ruling actually see things so much differently. They argue that race should actually play a role limited to map drawing. They actually believe that states should have greater authority over the redistricting. And they argue that political success should come through coalition building across multiple communities rather than race based district design. Regardless of where you guys actually stand on this point, there's a larger question that is worth exploring here. If political influence becomes more difficult to maintain, what other forms, what other forms of political power becomes even more important here? Should communities invest more heavily in things like should they invest more heavily in things like entrepreneurship, business ownership, economic development, education, heck, media ownership, local leadership? Because you see, power, mm, power doesn't only exist in government buildings like some of us like to think. Power exists in wherever people can influence outcomes. And we see often that history shows us that communities are often strongest when political power is paired with economic, cultural, and institutional power. And yes, I say economic like that because y'all gotta hear me. Y'all ain't hearing me. So where do we go from here? What does meaningful power actually look like moving forward, guys? No, one thing's for sure and two things are for certain. Nearly everyone can agree on this, at least people I know. You see, real change doesn't begin and end every 4 years, right? Political engagement is bigger than presidential elections. It actually includes your school boards. It includes your city council meetings. City councils period. It includes county commissioners. It includes all of your local judges, your community organizers, your neighborhood advocacies, people. You're supporting businesses, you mentoring future leaders, and holding elected officials accountable, no matter who wins, no matter which party is in power. If we actually define power only by election outcomes, we may never overlook other ways communities can create real influence. But if we broaden our understanding of power, we actually begin to see opportunities all around us, y'all. Maybe the power is in the voting. Maybe the power is in the ownership. Maybe the power is in our organizations, our Black owned businesses. Maybe the power is in our education. Maybe the power is building institutions that remain strong regardless of what political shift is occurring. And perhaps the real lesson from this conversation is that communities should never place all of their hopes in a single source of power, because sustainable influence is built through multiple avenues working together, all working together. So, whether you guys believe this ruling actually protects state authority or weakens Black representation, I know one thing is clear. The conversation it's not going away no time soon, because underneath all of the court cases, underneath all of the elections that we have in our country, underneath every political map that's constantly being redrawn, there is a deeper question here. Who actually has the power? Who who even gets heard? How do how do communities actually protect their influence in a changing America? Year by year, day by day, month by month, hour by hour, minute by minute. But what are we doing? Those questions matter far beyond Alabama, and they matter far beyond our politics today. They actually speak to a future of representation, participation, and community empowerment. So I want to hear from you guys. Do you guys actually believe that Black communities have gained political power over the last 20 years? Or are we actually still fighting many of the same battles in different forms? And if voting alone isn't enough, then where should Black communities focus their energy next? So I want you guys to join in the conversation and let me know what y'all think in the comments. And just a little FYI, for today's episode, I actually reviewed reporting and analysis from Reuters, NPR, and other sources covering voting rights, redistricting, and the Alabama congressional map case. And as always, Provoking Perspectives encourages all of our provokers to read much more broadly, explore the multiple viewpoints that are out there, and actually continue the conversation beyond this episode because it means so much to have this conversation. So, I just want to thank you guys for simply spending the time with me. If you made it through this video, thank you. If you sat down and you listened and you heard, thank you. If today's conversation actually challenged your thinking, please share this episode with someone who actually values the meaningful dialogue that we have here within our community. So please subscribe, leave a review, and join the Perspective Collective as we continue exploring the ideas that shape our communities, our culture, and our future as Black people. Until next time, keep asking these questions, keep challenging the assumptions, and keep provoking perspectives. Later.